Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Welcome, everyone. So, welcome to Next Level Play Therapy. And we're meeting on a different day and time than I normally do. And that's because I have my amazing guest, Dr. Fiona Zandt, today. Dr. Zandt, Fiona is in Australia. I'm here in the US. So we navigated our time zone differences a little bit different this week. And I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to talk about today. I feel like if you're a play therapist, then you have these kids on your caseload. If you work with children, if you work with adolescents, then the likelihood you have clients who are struggling with their big emotions of anger and emotion regulation is probably very high. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to talk about Fiona's new book that came out because it has some I think it's an amazing resource. And one of the things that I liked about the book was that it uses a neuroscience and attachment lens to really understand and look at anger, because that's, to me, how you're conceptualizing anger is going to influence how you address anger. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about this topic today. I feel like if you're in the play therapy space, then this is a really relevant topic. So for those of you who are joining us live, we would love to know who's here. Go ahead and post your name in the comments, what population you work with, where are you from. Feel free to join the conversation and ask questions. The only thing that we ask is that you not post questions about specific clients because it is a public format and we want to maintain privacy there. But if you have questions, or feel free to comment generally. For those of you who are watching on the replay, we would still love to know who has been watching, where you're from, what organization you work with. And so feel free to post in the comments as well. And for those of you who are listening on the podcast, feel free to comment as well. Please feel free to leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback and what's been helpful, any suggestions. So let's go ahead and get started for today. So I want to welcome my guest back, Dr. Fiona Zandt. Fiona and her colleague Suzanne this is like probably a couple years ago now. I discovered their first book that they published through Creative Child Therapy, and they run some workshops there in Australia. So if you're in Australia, then you probably want to check them out, because they run some awesome workshops there covering a lot of the topics we're going to talk about here. But that's where I first discovered them, and I went kind of fangirl. And I think I don't remember if I reached out to either you or Suzanne. I don't know. I commented, and I was like so excited. And then you guys agreed to be on my weekly live stream. This was like a couple years ago. I was so excited.
It's very lovely to connect, Cathi, because I had read your book and really enjoyed that ahead of us meeting the first time. So it's lovely to connect across the oceans.
Yeah, I know. That's the nice thing these days. I feel like since the pandemic, one of the, I would say, silver linings out of a terrible situation was that we really did learn how to reach out. to each other all over the world. And so I feel like our play therapy community, we got more connected all over. And I love hearing what people are doing in other countries and how people are using play therapy. So I was really excited to connect with you guys. So Fiona is actually a clinical I'm going to read what because I was so impressed by all the things you do. I don't want to miss anything. Fiona is a clinical psychologist and registered play therapist with over 20 years working with children and families. She runs a successful private practice in Melbourne, Australia, and is a senior psychologist at the Royal Children's Hospital. Also works as a supervisor and lecturer and enjoys running workshops for therapists with Suzanne Barrett through their business together called Creative Child Therapy Workshops. And Fiona has a new book out called Creative Ways to Help Children Regulate. Yes, that is it. Regulate and manage anger. So we're going to talk a little bit about that book. I've read it myself. I have a copy myself. It's got some awesome stuff and resources, information in there. So we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end and how to get that. So welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Cathi. Thanks so much for having me. And it's really exciting to be coming in and talking about anger and regulation because it's such an interesting topic, isn't it? And such an important one for us with all the children we see in our practices.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit before I pressed the go live button. And one of the things that I really, really loved about your book is that you use a neuroscience and attachment lens. And I love that kind of theoretical framework because it really does help play therapists and child and adolescent therapists to look at anger a different way instead of, oh, they're just being bad or, I'm a bad kid. We really want to look deeper to figure out what is going on with that. And there are so many different reasons for kids to struggle with anger. So I was curious in your work with children and families, I'm curious what you find to be some of the reasons that children are experiencing anger.
Yeah, I think anger is an emotion that as a culture we're often socialized to sort of shut down, want to avoid, want to stop. And I think that often when kids come in and there's a referral around angry outbursts or meltdowns or temper or whatever the family calls it, one of the first things that I'm always really keen to do is to really look underneath and explore what's actually happening for that child, because there can be a whole lot of different things going on for that child, and often there's anxiety underneath. Sometimes there might be shame or embarrassment. But, I think the real crux of what's going on underneath is typically that the child feels unsafe. So, they become dysregulated and they might not objectively be unsafe, but for them, their experience is one of feeling unsafe and overwhelmed. And, I think if we can help the grown-ups around them to really understand that's what's happening, then we can start to really explore that a bit more. So I felt really cautious in writing about anger because of some of the ways we talk about it as a society, and that's why I've called the book Creative Ways to Help Children Regulate and Manage Anger, because I think we're much better really to talk about regulation.
Yes. And I think one of the things I think is really important about this topic is really we don't want to focus on the outward behavior. We really want to look, if we really want to help them make the change and learn how to manage those really strong emotions that they're experiencing, we really need to look deeper and figure out what is activating this? When does it get activated? How does it get activated? When doesn't it get activated? Like, are there certain situations where it happens versus where it doesn't happen? I always look at some of the exploration for anger also to identify maybe some unidentified neuroprocessing issues going on. Like, I've got the non-typically developing kids. They're young adults now. But they, of course, I didn't necessarily know it as much when they were little. I was just like, why is everybody else's kids acting different than mine? And one time I remember saying my oldest was at the grocery. He was probably 3, maybe 4. He was probably 3, but he looked 5 because he was bigger. And he just had this massive meltdown right on his back, like screaming and yelling. We laugh about it now. And I remember looking at the cashier lady ringing us up, thinking I'm just trying to use some humor because he was like screaming like a madman. I wish his mother would come and get him. I said that once to a young cashier, and she looked at me like, "What's wrong with you?" Well, she probably doesn't have kids, but what I later realized was he had a lot of sensory processing.
Yeah.
ADHD, and we did not know it at the time. I didn't know about this thing called, this was like, he's 28 now. This long time ago. We didn't talk about these things so much back then. He had all these sensory processing things. And once I learned about that, I was like, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah. And often that can be what's going on, can't it? That there's an unmet need, or an unrecognized challenge, and the child is really overwhelmed or unsafe, and they're reacting. And I think that's really, we're talking so much more about polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful if we can get parents thinking about why their child might be dysregulated, as opposed to, focusing on the child's anger. Because sometimes, like for you in the cashier line, it brings up all these emotions in us as grown-ups.
Because you get active, as parents, we get activated too. Which is one of the things that I also liked about your book, where you, like, a lot of what you talk about is co-regulation.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to do with parents is teach them about emotion regulation. Like, their child, their emotion regulation circuitry is developing. It's not developed, it's developing. And their role as co-regulator to help, I always say, like, lay down those neural pathways, set up their kind of neurocircuitry for success. Even the kids who are neurodiverse do respond to that effective co-regulation from parents. And of course, we're never good. I did not do it perfectly all the time. We're not aiming for that. That's not even realistic. And like you were saying, helping parents really understand their role as co-regulators.
Yeah, and I think we have to give a huge amount of space to grown-ups, because, it's really normal to get activated and heightened when your child is activated and heightened. That's really understandable. And, co-regulation is what happens as we both kind of settle together. So, I think we really have to be very much working with those grown-ups, because even if we're able to effectively co-regulate a child in the room, even if we're seeing that child once a week, those opportunities are so much less than the grown-up who's there in a whole lot of other contexts for much more of the time, and who will be the person who's there in the longer term while we won't. So, you know, I think if we can really give grown-ups that space and help them to understand that process and to reflect on what they need to keep themselves, to move themselves into a bit more of a regulated space so they can regulate their child, it's really important that we're doing that work and taking that time. And we can do some of that, you know, with the grown-up in the room with the child, and there might also be some times when we want to have some one-on-one time with the grown-up to do that. So I talk a lot about that in the book in the context of really having grown-ups actively involved when we're doing an activity in the room, but also, you know, having a bit of a model for grown-ups about how they can notice what's happening for them and look after themselves and start to, you know, organise their child's feelings and regulate their child by doing some things together.
Yes, yes, I love that. Well, I was also thinking that maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the activities that you use, maybe some of the activities you talk about in your book to help children manage emotions. Are there any that you really like to use? There's a lot in there. There's a lot of good ones.
There's lots in there.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we've been talking a bit about grown-ups as well, so maybe I'll talk with you about this one and how I would use it with a child and a grown-up. So this is one that I call pit stops, and I usually just have a couple of cars, and in my playroom I've got a sand tray, and so we can make a track for the cars in the sand tray. But if you don't have a sand tray, you could always use a big sheet of paper and just draw a race track. A lot of kids will have had an experience of watching race cars, and so we can talk about, you know, when the race cars come in for a pit stop, and do kids know why they do that? And I think pit stops are a really good thing to talk about, because cars come in for two different reasons. Cars come in because there's a scheduled stop, and those are the times where, you know, we can drive around on the racetrack and talk about, oh, okay, you know, it's been 3 laps and it's time to go for a little stop. And how do you look after yourself across your day? What are your scheduled stops? And I think this is really important, particularly for our kids who might be neurodivergent, you know, and have a lot of overwhelm across their day. You know, it's really important that we think about what are the pit stops for them, and how do we help the grown-ups around them to recognise that that's an important part of their day, to have some regulating rhythms in there where they slow down, stop, connect, do the things that bring them joy. It's also really important for us as grown-ups, isn't it? So, you know, I often will have a grown-up driving a car around the track too, and we'll talk about what are the pit stops for you in your day. And I might share that for me, having a cup of tea and just 10 minutes to sit in the afternoon at some point is a really important pit stop, because we really need grown-ups to be thinking about how they look out for themselves across their days and their weeks and their months as well. So that's one way to use this activity, is to talk about how do we create those regulating or relaxing rhythms across the day. The other reason that cars come in for a pit stop, though, is because something's gone wrong. Yeah, so something happens out on the track that is a sign that we need to come in and have some care and rejuvenation. And that's a lovely way to start talking with families as well about regulation and anger, because, you know, families will often come in and they'll say, oh, you know, he goes from 0 to 100 in no time at all. And often that's very much how it feels for the grown-ups, yeah, because the child might not be showing those signs in a typical way, especially if they are neurodivergent, or the grown-up might be missing those signs, yeah, for a whole lot of different reasons.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the most helpful things we can do is to start to talk to kids and grown-ups about what are the early signs, what are the early warning signs, and then how do we need to look after the child when we see those. And so coming in for a pit stop because something has gone wrong on the track as you're driving around in the sand gives you an opportunity to reflect on that, doesn't it? So it gives you a chance to hear what the grown-up has noticed about early signs, see if there's anything the child might be able to share about that, and increase that discussion about what needs to happen in a pit stop for you in that moment. What are the things I can do to regulate you? Because it's different for different kids, yeah? So, when we talk about co-regulation, we're really talking about those moments of connection. Sometimes it's a breath or a movement of your body. Sometimes it's naming the feeling. And it can really vary because for some kids it can be an arm around their shoulder and, oh, I get it, sweetie, it's been really full on today. I can tell you're feeling really stressed. Yeah, quick squeeze, and that can be it. And for other kids, it needs to be a lot more. So it needs to be coming away from the situation and really having a good 30 minutes of downtime doing something they love. Yeah, so it's a good chance to talk about regulation as well as early signs, and both regulation in terms of how do we structure our day and how do we make sure we've got some rhythms in there that are really supportive for both grown-ups and kids, but also how do we do that in those moments where we can see we're starting to get dysregulated. And I love doing this in the sand because I think the sand can be so regulating.
Oh, I know. They love doing that. And that's a great idea. I love that idea of using the metaphor of a race and race cars and that whole idea of the pit stop. And there's two different reasons for pit stops. Some of them are scheduled to make sure everything's okay, checking in. And some of them are an indication that something has gone wrong and we need to address it, but not in a way that is focused on the child being bad. It's more focused on the anger as an indication of, something's gone wrong. And what can we do about that? And thinking about the pit stops, I mean, that would, having parents involved too is a great way to have parents. For some kids, they need at school. Like I know I've worked with a lot of kids where school is really overwhelming or things go on, or, maybe there's some teasing or bullying that's going on and they need a pit stop at school. And so
Absolutely.
working with the counselors counselors to have a place where they can do a pit stop. And if you use that language of pit stop, it takes a lot of the negative connotations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think language is so important in the work we do, isn't it? So when language resonates for a child and a family, being able to continue that language through your conversations is really powerful and helpful for them, I think. And you can see that dual focus, I think, of looking after the adult, helping them to develop that awareness of themselves and their emotions and their needs, and also the little person they're looking after, because both are so important, aren't they?
Yes, I love that. That's a great one. So it's just basically you just get little, like the little miniature cars, like
Yeah.
we would call them like the Matchbox cars.
Yeah. So I imagine most people have got cars around, and the sand tray is lovely. But again, if you don't have that, just some big paper can be a good way to do that. I really like to have kids take something home as a bit of a reminder as well about what we've talked about. So taking a photo of the cars in the sand, or taking paper that you draw the track on home can be a nice way of them continuing that conversation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so lots of ideas like that in the book, and activities very much to use with grown-ups in the room.
That's awesome. Um, so why don't we talk a little bit about your book? So the name of the book is called Creative Ways to Help Children Regulate and Manage Anger. And so it's published by Jessica Kingsley Publisher.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about like how people can get a copy if they're interested, and maybe a little bit of like the structure of the book so people
Yeah.
can kind of see what's in there?
Yeah, so the book is probably the easiest way to get it on the States, I imagine, is Amazon. So it's definitely on Amazon, the Jessica Kingsley website as well. It's available as Kindle or a hard copy, depending on how you like to read. In terms of structure, there's certainly chapters with lots of tips and ideas about working with kids and with families, but there's also lots of activities woven through the book, and each of those activities is written up, so they're very much directive play therapy activities, so you can really use them to help children and grown-ups understand and explore a therapeutic concept around regulation and anger, and really, drawing on those therapeutic powers of play, so really helping the family to express and explore and understand and communicate with each other as well. So it's also got a chapter in there on working with the grown-ups, and I think that, again, it can be an important piece. And I know that some therapists feel really comfortable in that space and some therapists feel really uncomfortable in that space, so there's lots in there around how you can really engage with those grown-ups and really think about where they're at and what their own experiences of being regulated as a child might be, what their current experience of emotions is, and how they can best be engaged in the therapeutic process. And there's a bit of a model called the Holds model in there about how children can respond when their kids are dysregulated. So that's a nice one that grown-ups tend to find quite helpful as well.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that's really nice. And I think, one of the things that I appreciated that you put in the book, because is like how to help grown-ups be in the session. Because what I find, because I do a lot of consultation and in my Play Therapy Academy program, as well as like different trainings I do, one of the questions that always comes up is, should I let the grown-ups in the session? What should I do about that?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you don't have a clear plan,
Mm.
kind of communicate with the parents, or I love the way that you said grown-ups in there too, because children don't always live with their
Mm.
parents. Sometimes they live with other family members. Sometimes they're in foster care because they're not able to live with their parents. So but one of the things that I find is therapists are not sure what to do or how to have them in there. And when you don't have that clear plan, when you don't have those conversations with parents about, hey, here's here's my idea about how to have you in the session. Here's what you'll be doing. Here's what I'll be doing. What do you need for, I always like to ask, what do you need from me? If you find anything that I'm doing is not helpful, please make sure to let me know, because we'll meet pretty regularly without your child present. That's where we'll kind of work together and strategize. But when we have them in the sessions, it's helpful to them to know what the expectations are, because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing versus what you're doing. And they're always gonna worry about, am I doing something wrong?
Mm.
Which is natural. I would think those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really, I often say it's the hardest job in the world, parenting, isn't it? And I think we have to have a lot of grace for grown-ups, and I think particularly the grown-ups who are bringing their children to therapy, often they're the change makers in their families. And, they haven't had an experience of being regulated themselves, and they're often still struggling with that too. And then, they're trying to support their child through this. And I think sometimes we talk with parents about things like, emotion coaching, and we expect that we can tell them that once and they'll be able to do it. And the reality is, that's a really different way for them to respond. And anytime we do anything that's new and different, particularly if we're doing it in times of heightened emotion, it's incredibly difficult, and it's going to take a lot of practice, and they will get it wrong, and they will continue to have times where they get it wrong. That's part of what we expect with parenting, that there will have times where we have those ruptures and we get to repair those. So I think sometimes the way we approach grown-ups needs to be a lot more nuanced, and we need to put a lot more time into that space often.
Yeah, I totally agree. Which, one of the reasons that I ended up kind of developing, it kind of gradually developed into a model. So using that attachment focused family play therapy is the way that I look at it, which is really similar to what you are kind of encouraging people to do in your book with the activities. Is you're helping parents learn in real time and giving them support to do that for their child, and that their child is using their parent and learning how to use their parent. And now they have, they have these activities like you mentioned, the race car and the pit stop activity. Now they have, like you said, that language that they can use. And that will, like, oh, do you need a pit stop?
Yeah.
That language. But now you've taught parents how to support their child in a way that's going to be effective. You've worked with them and the child to using these play therapy activities. And now they get to do that, and it's going to be over and over and over. It's not one time and magically everything is fixed, right? It's over and over.
Yeah, and that's such an important expectation to manage with grown-ups, isn't it? Both how long this is likely to take to shift, but also, I think sometimes we have this really strong idea around self-regulation, and everyone should be able to self-regulate. And I think that's really huge, and it's huge for us as grown-ups. I know if I'm upset that, I want to talk to someone I love and I want to hug. And, I think most of us regulate in relationship, and that's okay. But we seem to have this idea that, children should be able to self-regulate, and it's not realistic. So, I think knowing both that this will take time to improve, but also that we can expect that, even older kids will still at times need support, then that's going to be much more realistic, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today. So for those of you who are interested, we will put comments. We'll put some links in the comments for those of you who may be in Australia, being able to kind of check out some of the trainings that creative child therapy workshops are doing. Also, being able to get a copy of the book by going over to Jessica Kingsley Publishers or going on Amazon to get your copy of the book. So we will put some of those links in the comments below.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Cathi. And feel free to pop on to the work the website is Child Psychology Workshops .com.au, and we do have some online courses as well, which, you know, I think for overseas, if they're interested, can be a fit too. But so lovely to talk to you about the book and this topic, because it's such an important one.
Definitely, really important topic, I think. And I mean, we all have them on our caseloads, so nice to be able to have some resources to be able to support our clients and their parents. So.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will, so just for those of you who are interested, I live stream every week. I typically am on Wednesdays here in the United States. If you found the information helpful, please feel free to like and share the information across your social media platforms. Please feel free to share with your colleagues this amazing resource that Fiona has written. So I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.